All right, 14 minutes after 8 o'clock. Thank you so much indeed for staying with Morning Live. Now we continue to discuss the situation in Zimbabwe further, and now we're joined by the Minister of Defense, Military Veterans here at home in South Africa, Minister Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula, who traveled to Zimbabwe last week as part of a two-person envoy and also met with President Robert Mugabe and the ZANU-PF military leaders. Minister, good morning. Thank you so much indeed for coming through.
Good morning, and good morning to the listeners, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much indeed. I want us to go back a little. When you got there to Zimbabwe before the talks started, what sense did you get from President Robert Mugabe and all the parties involved?
Okay, firstly, I need to give a context to the visit. The President of the Republic of South Africa is the current chair of SADC. So it was in that capacity that he then decided to send us as special envoys to just go and do a quick scanning of the environment, which was necessary because the previous night we had received calls from Zimbabwe that the president was under house arrest. So one of the mandates I had from the chair of SADC was to firstly establish whether in fact there is a military coup in Zimbabwe or not. But secondly, to establish whether indeed it is true that the president of the Republic of Zimbabwe is under arrest or not. And then thirdly, to come back and give a report so that the president can then contact the chairperson of organ, which is Angola, so that they can convene a quick meeting. Because remember, if it is a military coup, the position of SADC and the African Union is that we do not recognize and we do not accept governments, unconstitutional removal of governments. So those are the key, those are the fundamentals which we needed to establish.
Yeah. And what was your findings in terms of whether it was indeed a coup or just a military takeover?
Military takeover is a coup.
Exactly.
To be honest, my initial impression was that, look, even as we were leaving from here, because at that time, remember, there had been a takeover of the public broadcaster, and of course a statement had been made by the military. Thirdly, of course, the President of the Republic was already under house arrest, according to information which we had. So we were convinced that there was a military coup. So obviously we needed to engage with the President himself and the government of the Republic of Zimbabwe, and then with the command, with the generals. We met with both entities. But what was interesting to me is that when we were going to meet the head of state, we found the head of state with some ministers, but also with the chief of the defense force, who is Gerald Chiwenga, in the same room. They were meeting for the first time, by the way, and they were meeting to come and address us. And I think people tried very hard to create and give us an impression that all was normal, all is okay, and there's unity in Zimbabwe, and that in fact the people of Zimbabwe, if there are any differences, will be able to resolve their issues. Of course, the general was also given an opportunity to speak, and the general was very quick to make the point that, look, we are doing what is called Operation Restore Legacy, right? There's a lot of bickering in the party, and the bickering is impacting negatively on governance. Already, some elements within government are trying to drive a wedge between the different security services, and that to them is totally unacceptable. And they kept on emphasizing that they feel strongly that it's about time that they remove some of the undesirable elements, some of the elements who have negative influence to the head of state. There's a lot of disunity as a result of what has been happening. And actually, I think the general was open enough to say that, look, we've left it for too long. And when the president, and when he walked in, by the way, the general, I think I should say this, which took me back. Military, you know, is military. Military has discipline. The general saluted the commander-in-chief.
Yes.
Not only saluted the commander-in-chief, when they were greeting each other, the general said, we are doing this to protect your legacy. Whatever it is that we have done, we're doing it to protect your legacy.
So they gave him an assurance that
Absolutely.
was all. Yes, yeah. Because there was also a pic circulating on social media showing President Robert Mugabe with the Army Chief Commander Chiwenga himself, and many people were hopeful that the talks will indeed, bring about change, which is not the case.
That was after the meeting we attended. That was just at the end. I was there when they took that picture. Look, I think that the people of Zimbabwe must now confront the issues. People of Zimbabwe have to deal with the real issues and not create this facade that all is normal. There's unity. They can deal with their problems. And of course they can deal with their problems. But I think it needs to come out that there is a problem which needs to be resolved. There's now a situation where the conflict now has developed amongst members of government themselves, including the security services. What was interesting is that when we met the president, even later when I met the command structure, there were some elements of the command structure which were not part of that meeting. So there is a problem, and I think there is an understanding of what the nature of the challenge is in Zimbabwe. I just think that, and they gave us an impression that there's political will to resolve those issues.
But I think interest really, because here back at home, Minister, we relied on reports and we kept saying to our viewers unconfirmed reports. There were also reports coming through that President Robert Mugabe did not agree to an exit strategy.
Well, I don't know about the exit strategy. What I do know is that when we left on Friday, there was going to be a meeting of ZANU-PF Central Committee on Saturday. A meeting which was going to discuss all of these challenges which are which are affecting the functioning of both the governance as a result of the challenges they have in the party. Now, after that meeting, there would have been a statement made by the members of the Central Committee, which they did. And yesterday there was engagement between the president and the commanders, the generals. And what I do know is going to happen is that today there's going to be, we were told there's going to be a very big, huge prayer meeting, which is going to be praying for the situation in Zimbabwe. Yeah. But the praying, the marching, and all of those things are not going to deal with the issues of Zimbabwe.
There's an impeachment that's supposed to take place by noon today?
I'm not sure.
Yes.
I'm not sure. We'll see tomorrow when it happens.
But
what is important is that there's been a ministerial troika meeting, and tomorrow we'll be in Angola because there is a troika meeting of heads of state. And that meeting will deal with issues of peace and security, because that's the role of the organ. They'll be dealing with issues of peace and security. The instability in Zimbabwe is likely to spill over to the neighboring countries. So it needs to be cleared, because the generals assured me consistently, made the statement that this is not a military coup, Minister. This is not a military takeover, Minister. We are just trying to solve problems which we have in our party, which are now spilling over to government and which are now causing a wedge amongst ourselves as the security services of Zimbabwe.
Now, Minister, we've seen President Robert Mugabe addressing the nation live on television last night, acknowledging that there are problems within the ruling party itself, but, assuring Zimbabweans that things have to go back to normality. Has President Jacob Zuma perhaps responded as the chairperson of SADC on what happened last night?
No, actually, if anything, I should have mentioned that when we met with the president did make the point that, yes, there are challenges in Zimbabwe. He did acknowledge and took responsibility that there are challenges in Zimbabwe. However, he does not agree with the manner in which the generals had gone about dealing with that situation, and kept on saying, I think we can engage and we can find a solution to the problems. Now, President Zuma initially was in touch, and I think he has been in touch throughout the weekend with the president of Zimbabwe. But I do need to emphasize that Zimbabwe is a sovereign state. And South Africa cannot be seen to be interfering in the problems, political problems of Zimbabwe. But what the president is seeking to do is to make an intervention together with a collective of his counterparts in his capacity as the chair of SADC.
Okay.
He may not do it as the President of the Republic of South Africa, even though this is going to affect us negatively in South Africa. Whatever he does, he'll do it as chair of SADC.
All right, so I suppose we wait and see what comes out of the meeting in Angola tomorrow.
I think we should, but hopefully Zimbabweans this morning will wake up and continue to engage, because indeed the solution lies
within them.
With Zimbabweans.
Minister, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much
Thank
indeed.
you.
Well, there you have it. That's our Minister of Defense and Military Veterans here at home, Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula, talking to us about her observations. As you may all know, that she was part of the envoy that was sent to Zimbabwe last week. All right, 25 minutes after 8 o'clock, it's time for your sport update.